There once was a great king of Greece. He tried to maintain the good peace. He had a pet fish, which he turned to a dish. I'd say he's slightly unhinged, at the least. Hey guys, James here again with another game review. This time we're going to be talking about Old World by Mohawk Games, who are the creators of Off-World Trading Company. Old World is a 4X strategy game taking place during the Bronze through early medieval ages. You play as one of the various Mediterranean civilizations of the Old World as you guide your kingdom to glory. If I had to compare this game to other games, I'd say it's like if you took the ancient and classical eras in civilization and added some of the family dynasty roleplay aspects of Crusader Kings. The game at the time of this review is still in early access, so it can be a bit rough around the edges, but I think it does a lot of interesting and new things. As a huge Civ fan, I really enjoy the game and would recommend it to people who are looking for a bit of a change of pace. And of course, as a Civ fan, I will undoubtedly be comparing it a lot to Civ when trying to explain some of the mechanics, just FYI. The game is crazy deep, so there's actually a lot to explain in this review. Let's dive into this. Old World is a historical, turn-based 4X game. The point of the game is to start a dynasty and create the most glorious empire you can, which can be accomplished in a number of ways. One of the main ways Old World differentiates itself from Civ is through the family leadership mechanic. Similar to the family system in Crusader Kings, in Old World, your nation starts with a founder, for example, Romulus of Rome, Dido of Carthage, or Ashurbanipal of Assyria. Each turn in Old World represents a year, and your leader will age, get married, have kids, and eventually die. Over the course of the game, you're able to set your succession plan and determine who you want to carry on the throne. Over time, your leader and heirs are able to develop different skills and attributes, and these attributes help determine the type of effect that they might have on your nation. For example, you might have a character who has a high discipline stat, which makes it so your nation will generate additional gold. However, they might have low courage, and as a result, your nation's ability to create troops might also be weakened. I really enjoyed the family dynasty aspect, and I think it adds an interesting layer of role-playing as well as strategy to the game. When you start off the game, one thing to note is that cities can only be settled in specific city sites. This is different from Civ, where you can settle almost anywhere, but I do know other 4X games have similar systems. This makes it very important for you to scout the map and find these different city sites. Thankfully, you can camp a unit on these sites in order to prevent other nations from jumping on your territory. Once you're ready to settle a city, you have to choose which aristocratic family you want to rule the city. Each nation has 4 distinct families. For example, your nation might have a family which specializes in science, a family with stronger cavalry units, and a lot more. With each nation having a different combination of family types as well as different bonuses, this makes it so every nation does feel fairly different to play. Every city you settle will be controlled by one of these royal families. In any game, you are only able to select 3 of the 4 available families to include in your run, and so you need to think about how you want to play and pick the appropriate families. These families become an important part of the game as they also develop their own family trees, and you, as leader of the nation, need to be able to manage relationships with each of the families. If you let a relationship with a family fall too much, you might find yourself with some rebellions to deal with. Additionally, you'll have rival nations that you need to manage your relationships with, all of them with their own leaders and heirs. There are also tribes that will control different areas of land that you will need to defeat in order to expand. These tribes are like mini nations, all with their own leaders as well. Beyond that, religions will pop up throughout the game, and each of these religions will have their own leaders with who you need to manage your relationship as well. You'll need to utilize a number of different tools in order to maintain these relationships, including luxuries, influence, and marriage. Throughout the game, you'll find yourself with a lot of difficult decisions to make, as you need to be careful about who you want to be friends with and who you might turn into an adversary. Beyond all of that, you also have a number of other relationships you might need to manage, including who you choose to be your court members in government, who you choose as governors for your cities, as well as who you choose to be your generals for your armies. The relationship management portion of the game is actually fairly difficult. You'll often find yourself having to make decisions between 2 parties, and so you're invariably going to have to make a lot of people unhappy. This results in more conflict, but it actually does make the game quite interesting. As leader of your nation, you have to prove your legitimacy to the royal families. There's a number of ways for you to gain and lose legitimacy, but in general, you gain it by doing great things, and you lose it by doing not as great things, or things that offend the royal families. One of the ways to gain legitimacy is by completing ambitions. As leader, you will have your own personal ambitions which you can try to achieve, such as controlling a number of cities, defeating a number of enemies, and other similar things. When a leader dies, unfinished ambitions can also pass on to their children, but be warned, failing to complete ambitions makes you lose legitimacy. Completing 10 ambitions across the entire game is one way of winning the game, but I did find that ambition victories were a little bit difficult as it can be pretty unforgiving if you miss a couple. Legitimacy becomes important as it's one of the main ways for you to gain orders, and orders are part of Old World's unique take on movement in 4X games. Typically, in most 4X games, you're capable of moving every unit you have every turn. The order system basically limits the number of moves or decisions you can perform in a turn, where the greater and more legitimate your ruler is, the larger the pool of orders you can use to rule. It's actually a system that's pretty difficult to get used to, as it can really force you to think about what priorities you have on any given turn. If you're not careful and move your workers around too much, you might not have enough orders to properly command your army. If you have the orders and resources though, it can potentially allow you to move units more than they typically would be allowed. My main issue with the system though is the fact that you might have some spans of time, particularly when you're at peace, where you might have a lot of unused orders go to waste. These unused orders can't be carried over unless you have specific upgrades, so they're sold for gold, which is actually nice. But then when you find yourself at war, you'll often not have enough orders to move everything you have, and I felt like this balance could actually be a little bit difficult. However, from the perspective of ruling and history, I think it does make a lot of sense as a mechanic, as leaders will only have so much time to devote to managing. Thankfully, a mechanic they have in the game which I really love is the undo button. With it, you can undo parts of your turn if you make any wrong moves, or if you find yourself unable to make key moves. I hope other games start to implement something similar, but I can also see how it could be abused. Just be careful of spamming the undo button too much, as I've had multiple turns be undone because I was a little too impatient. Another way in which Old World differentiates itself from Civ is through events. Over the course of the game, you'll have a number of events that can happen. With these events, you'll be making different decisions that'll have different effects on the story of your civilization. There's a variety of interesting events and results, and a lot of them are actually based on historical events. These events can also affect a number of different things, such as your relationships, your stats, or your resources. And some of these might even have results that return down the line. For example, you might have an event where you find you and your spouse have grown apart, and you might have the opportunity to get down and dirty with someone else. You can decide to remain faithful, or you could not, and as a result, you might end up with a bastard child who might one day rise to the throne. I like the event system a lot, as I personally really like the roleplay aspect of the game and thinks it adds a lot of variation to the game. It can be a lot of fun regardless of whether you're focused on strategy or more focused on roleplay. The game is constantly adding more events, but even so, you might find some repeats from time to time. While admittedly I might not have seen all the events that are available, I do hope that they add some more crazy ones, such as power struggles and potentially losing the throne. Like any 4X game, managing your cities and empire is a daunting task, and I think Old World has a lot to consider here. In Old World, cities produce things through 3 different methods of production: growth for civilians, training for your armies, and civics for different projects to improve your cities. Additionally, cities generate a number of different physical resources such as gold, food, wood, stone, and iron, and these are used for creating different buildings and units. Using your workers, you can build a number of buildings to generate more of these resources. A lot of these buildings will also have adjacency bonuses where putting multiple next to each other will yield more of a resource. Combine that with the governor system, and you begin to really be able to specialize your cities to do or generate specific things. Properly growing your cities is super important, as they're one of the main ways for you to gain victory points, with a victory point victory being the most common way of winning. I personally found the whole city building part of the game pretty difficult as well, as I felt like it could be really hard to balance the different resources and moving parts of each game. You need to make sure your cities are growing and happy, you need to make sure you're gaining enough resources, and you need to maintain enough of an army to defend your lands. I found that walking the line is a tough balancing act, which can really be punishing if you're not careful. Another quick thing to point out is the building of wonders. Like in Civ, you can create massive projects to show off the glory of your nation, and these will often grant some bonuses and victory points. These cost a massive amount of resources to build, but thankfully, once you start making one, others can't compete to make the same one. You're actually able to buy and sell resources through a really cool market system in the game. The system is similar to the one in Off-World Trading Company, where the buy and sell price of resources will vary depending on the supply and demand. I think this is a really cool system and is useful, as the actual trade missions conducted with other civilizations is a bit underwhelming. When conducting trade missions with other nations, it's often a bit random, as the AI are in control of the trade offers, and they present you a number of deals you need to select from. These are, again, a bit random and sometimes might be for things you don't really want to trade, so I wish they would have allowed you to at least select what resources you're willing to offer. The combat system is also pretty unique, but it definitely takes some time to getting used to, as it's way more in depth compared to Civ. With units in Old World, there's a lot more to consider and plan out. 1, due to the huge amount of distance units can potentially cover with the order system, and 2, due to how different units have different attack styles. For example, spearman attacks can hit one unit directly in front of them, as well as pierce through to the unit behind them. Horsemen can perform additional attacks if they perform a finishing blow on a unit, and archers have attacks that have some pretty considerable range, albeit with decreasing damage based on distance and terrain. These different traits make positioning and attack order super important. While I do like the different attack styles, I also feel like due to the large movement distance of units, war can be pretty difficult, and sometimes units can kind of swoop in and out of nowhere. This makes it so enemies can sometimes hit and run, swooping in to surround your guys, picking one off, and then retreating way back into their own territory. This makes it incredibly important to surround and focus down units, as otherwise it can be easy for them to recover. War is a major part of Old World, so it definitely takes some getting used to, and is a fairly difficult combat system when compared to Civilization. What makes it especially hard to get used to is the fact that I feel like in this game, attacking units have a massive advantage over defending units, so you always need to be on your toes. Thankfully, I found that it can be relatively easy to make peace, although depending on your strength, you may need to pay hefty tribute in order to keep the truce. Finally, I wanted to bring up the civics and tech systems. In Old World, technologies are somewhat random, where you select from randomly drawn available technologies. I do like the system as it makes games feel less samey, but I also feel like as a result of it being somewhat random, you might have some tough times when you don't get certain key technologies early. Meanwhile, for Civics, it's a system where you have to make decisions between two different options which have long-term effects on how your nation plays and feels. For example, you might need to choose between slavery and freedom, or polytheism and monotheism, and these decisions will change the bonuses that your nation might have. So I know I just explained a lot of mechanics and I probably confused you at one point or another, but have no fear. Old World has a great tooltip system which makes it very easy to figure out what certain things do. If you're ever unsure about something, you just need to hover over it. You can even click the middle mouse button to get a deeper explanation. It's honestly super easy to use, and I think that it should be the standard that other 4X and grand strategy games should look to. The game is really deep, and even with a considerable amount of hours sunk into the game, there are aspects that I didn't even cover in this review, or I myself don't even fully understand yet. All in all, I find the game pretty difficult overall, even on normal difficulty. I think even seasoned 4X veterans will find the game to be pretty challenging, but it definitely makes things interesting. I really like the victory point system, as I feel like a lot of Civ games can end up feeling similar due to the same few victory conditions being available. And with victory points, I feel like Old World gives you more freedom in how you want to play. However, I do wish that there were some more ways to obtain victory points. As for some of the technical aspects, I would say the graphics look okay. They honestly look a lot like Civ 5 graphics, so I wouldn't say it looks incredible or modern, at least in its current form. It's a more realistic style when compared to Civ 6, but I'm not particularly blown away by the visuals personally. The music and sound I would say are only okay as well. The music sounds appropriate for the context, although to be honest, I don't feel like I really notice the music all that much when I'm playing, and I do feel like there are some extended moments of silence. I would say the same for the sound effects where they sound appropriate, but can maybe be a little bit underwhelming at times. Of course, keep in mind that this game is currently in early access, so a lot of what I say might be changed by the time the game is officially released. One thing to note with performance is I do find that especially towards the late game, the game does run a little bit poorly, but again, this can be expected with early access. Overall though, I really like Old World and I had it included as one of my top games I played in 2020. There aren't any real major flaws I can think of, although there are some potential improvements to some of the systems which I pointed out in my review. I think the game does a lot of cool new things while also pulling from a lot of other strategy games. I'm really looking forward to seeing how the game progresses. If you're a fan of Civilization and similar strategy games, I would say definitely give it a look. For me personally, I do think it's worth the $40 price tag, but of course, some might want to wait for it to come out of early access or for it to drop on Steam, although I'm not sure if or when that might happen. But hey, that's just me. Feel free to let me know down below what you think. Have you tried Old World and what did you think of it? And if you made it this far, I just wanted to say I appreciate you checking out this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider hitting that like or subscribe button as it helps my channel grow and motivates me to make more and more videos. And as usual, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Peace.